Welcome to the Consummate Athlete Podcast, where we explore what it means to be a well-rounded, happy, goal-crushing athlete. Every week, myself, sports journalist Molly Herford, and cycling coach and kinesiologist Peter Glassford interview experts and chat through all of your training questions. We're excited to have you along for the ride. Hello. Welcome back to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. Peter, how's it going?
It's going very well. Yeah, we've had some great warm weather adventures. We had our niece up. We were doing some parkour on some local rocks and so forth over the weekend. So it was a very fun weekend hanging out with family in the outdoors.
Yes, warning, if you ever are invited by Peter to go on a hike, just understand that it is not like a casual hike where I can walk with my Starbucks coffee or something like that.
Well, I like to get people to something that's going to expand them and really give them an exploration, something they haven't done before.
I mean, it was great. And honestly, we found like the one cool shady spot on a very hot week.
Yeah, some really tall rocks that keep the cool weather in, and it was really, really neat. So a little passageway that was almost like an air conditioner blowing this cold air out, despite it being up, what was it, almost 100 degrees, I think, on the weekend. And
I think
quite humid.
The real feel, I think, was over 100.
Yeah. So we did that. But of note today, we have Selene Yeager on, and we're talking all things menopause, aging, I guess a bit of longevity and just general health in there as well. But really excited to finally get Selene back on the podcast.
Yes, Selene has been on the podcast a few times now. We'll include links to past episodes in the show notes. We've talked gravel. We have talked menopause before. We've talked just, cycling, all kinds of stuff with her. And today we really wanted to do a bit more of like a menopause, I'm going to say 101 and 201. Like, we touch on a lot of stuff in this episode. And really it was for selfish reasons, if we're being totally honest, Peter works with a lot of women who are, hitting this stage, hitting this phase. And, there's a lot of questions that come up around how you still train, how you still perform, how you, think about performance as you're hitting this. And I think Selene really put some of the stuff really bluntly, where she was talking about when she kind of first started going through perimenopause, the drop off that she felt in power was almost an overnight kind of thing. And, I think a lot of women listening to this can relate to that.
And so Selene's podcast, Hit Play Not Pause, not Feisty Menopause, but that's the brand, which we discuss on the podcast as well. But both are good search terms if you're looking, and we'll link to all their podcasts and website as well. But it's something that I really try and listen to every week is when Selene's podcast comes out, because it's dealing with a lot of these topics, both in case studies, real women and what they're going through, which I find really helpful and interesting, but then also just the latest science and researchers and experts in the field. So definitely a big resource that you could go and look into. But also we have Selene on today sort of distilling some of these and some of the questions I've had through following this and trying to keep up to date on all the menopause research and the high performing women who are going through menopause and how that's different than maybe some of the common research or common things we hear in the news about menopause.
Absolutely. And we will say, if you're premenopausal, if you're a woman listening to this, or if you're a guy listening to this, keep listening. Don't skip this episode, because I think a lot of what we talk about, for the women who aren't quite in that phase yet, I include myself in that group for the next couple of years anyway, fingers crossed. We talk a bit about what to kind of expect or things to do to kind of ease the transition. And what not to do to ease the transition. Because I think it's very tempting to start panicking as a, now 38-year-old woman, like start panicking and being like, okay, I need to stop doing endurance and start lifting weights. And that's not really the answer either. And then for men out there, I think this is a good one. We do talk a lot about, just aging in general. So I think, we're all getting older. But also if you have a spouse, a partner, a friend, a training buddy, etc., who's, going through this phase of life, I think it's good to have just a little bit of understanding.
Yeah, understanding and grace, for sure. I think so. I think that's probably the biggest thing. I mean, I think if you wanted to just replace the word menopause with aging, I guess you can do that. But I think the more important and mature way to go through this is to think like you interact with a lot of women through your day, and probably even ride and recreate and live with several. So I think being able to be someone who's helpful and at least understanding as people go through these different challenges and symptoms along the way is probably quite useful.
For sure. Okay, well, let's get into this. Make sure you head over to the show notes so you can catch up on past episodes we've had with Selene, catch up on her podcast, Hit Play Not Pause, and everything that the Feisty Menopause crew is doing over there. Yeah, with that, let's get into it. Enjoy this conversation with Selene Yeager. Selene, I am so excited to have you back. We are so excited to have you back on the Consummate Athlete podcast. So, welcome back.
It is great to be back. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's always so fun to chat with you. I feel like I end up talking about you all the time as far as just like someone who's been like mentor, career I've followed forever, someone whose footsteps I like very much want to walk in. So it's always really fun to get to talk to you and nerd out on this stuff.
Well, I really appreciate that.
Now, Selene, how do you describe yourself now? Are you a pure podcaster now? Is that what you're calling yourself? What do you call yourself?
That's a great question. I get that all the time. I still don't say, and it's probably because I was a writer for my entire life. So podcaster isn't the first thing out of my mouth, though it is now coming out of my mouth more. I I still describe myself as a writer because I still do a lot of writing. I have the Feisty 40 Plus newsletter that I write each week, and I still co-author many books. So that is still a big part of my identity. And this is like a little geeky maybe, but I like podcasts because it is an extension of writing in some way. Yeah, I see the nods. I like that. But I spent my whole life as a writer, right? And I would talk to people like you guys for an hour, and two lines might have been in the show, or in the feature. But now I can do all of that same in-depth research, but it's this long conversation that can breathe, and you get all that information and nuance that is nearly impossible outside of a big book. That's a long answer, but that was
No,
long-winded
I
way to say
love it.
how I
I love
identify.
it. Also, have you kept count? Like, do you know how many books you're up to now?
I look up because I have them all there. Maybe 30 that I've contributed to. I
Wow.
mean, how many that I have, like, my name is on the cover itself is 10? I don't know. I would actually have to count, probably more, but yeah, it's a lot.
I love the point where you can lose track of that. And I've been, now that I'm in like the co-authoring space too, yeah, the numbers start to get very like
Since 1994, sister. I mean, this is a long time.
a large body of work, a large body of work.
Now we're here today. We're talking towards menopause. It's sort of where we're going to try and steer the ship a little
We're
bit.
getting there.
We can
We're
go
getting there.
everywhere.
It's a transition.
And I always giggle a little bit because I listen to your podcast, the Feisty Menopause podcast, every week, really, and I really enjoy like the case studies, honestly, or something. I've really enjoyed my whole like academic career and in coaching. I always like it. So I really like your episodes where it's a woman's experience just going through menopause, and I take a lot out of that, and I hope hopefully lots of women take something out of that. But as a coach too, now 10, 11, 12 women who are going through or have gone through and continue to go through menopause and sort of just everything associated with that, and while pursuing high performance in work, in life, in sport. Yeah, I just really enjoy it. So I want to really highlight that if folks haven't listened to the Feisty Menopause podcast, they should. And I'll
Hit
get this.
play, not pause is the actual.
So,
Just to yeah, I know that it gets a little confusing because if they do that, they may not find it. So it is
Fair
hit
enough.
play, not pause. Yeah.
well, I guess it's always hello, feisty women. Is that how you always greet people? I'm like,
Hello, strong, feisty women. Yes, very
always
good,
like,
Peter. Is how I always say it, and it's a Feisty Menopause production. But
there you go. There you go.
yeah, all good,
All the
good.
brands. Awesome. So thought maybe like right off the bat, this is sort of my like male coach dumb question to start. But I thought, one of the common themes seems to be in this. I'm also going through a menstruation course right now as well, because I have either women, approaching menopause, perimenopause, or going through periods and sort of what is the word I'm looking for? Puberty as well. So all these transitions in life.
That's women, man. It's girls and women.
Turns out,
That's
yeah.
pretty much all of
Welcome.
them. Yeah.
Welcome
Yeah.
to our lifespan, Peter. Go ahead.
The
But
best part though is like that as he's doing all this research, he'll like occasionally just look over at me and be like, "Wait a second, you guys go through this is what happens to you?" And I'm like, "Yeah."
Every 28 days, my friend.
well, and so I think the one thing that struck out to me was that like a lot of stuff we just don't talk about. I think that's obvious, but maybe not obvious to everyone. So maybe just to start, could you give us definition of sort of the perimenopause, menopause, just sort of like these terms that we might talk about today? Probably review for people, but I think a lot of times these terms get misunderstood. Let's just start there, sort of a softball for you, but maybe a good review for all the rest of us.
Yeah, and that's a really good question. And it's also 1000% understandable if you, Molly, the people listening, don't know, because we use menopause as this enormous bucket the size of an ocean, right? And all menopause is 1 day in time when you have not had a period for 366 days. You know, you've gone a year without a period. Some women don't even know because they've had an IUD for 15 years or any of these kind of things. So it is very understandable that we don't understand what it actually means. Everything after that period is technically post-menopause, but you'll hear people say, I'm a menopausal woman, and that's probably what they mean, except now that we have so much attention on perimenopause, which I'll define in a second, now people are saying menopausal to even a bigger bucket, and it can get quite messy and confusing because what has been very little appreciated, even though science has long understood, is that as women, there's not a light switch for our ovaries. You don't just put up the chairs and vacuum the rug and put a close sign in the window of your ovaries, right? It doesn't work that way. It's a process that can take years, sometimes a decade, where your egg supply is dwindling, the ovaries are not making hormones the same way because they're like, what's happening? We need more estrogen. No, we need this, we need that. And there's this fluctuating of the ovarian hormones as the reproductive system is starting to get ready to really put the close sign in the door. And that causes a lot of chaos in a woman's life. It's the menopause transition is being referred to often now because it is a transition. It can take, like I said, years. And for some women, this is the most disruptive time of the whole process. But the problem is, like, we really haven't talked about that much until quite recently, and that's where you might still be getting pretty regular cycles if you have cycles and if you don't have an IUD. And there's all this chaos going on because now there's a greater understanding that estrogen, progesterone, or hormones impact every organ system, every cell. They impact so much more than just our reproductive function. So once those hormones start fluctuating and you start having those symptoms, you are technically in perimenopause or the menopause transition. Once you are in that period that you have not had a period for a year, or there are tests that you can have done that show there aren't really great tests for perimenopause, but you can have tests that are like, okay, you are actually in menopause. They test other hormone levels. And then postmenopause is everything after that point. So if you want to talk in terms of ages, the average age of menopause itself is 51, 52, depending where you live, your ethnicity, and so forth. Perimenopause, typically somewhere around 45-ish, is where it starts. Some women can be earlier, some later.
And as young as like 35, I've seen, but like it could depend, like different
I have
surgeries and
thoughts on that.
procedures
Well, oh
too.
yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
There is early menopause, surgical for sure, and those are harsh. Like surgical
Right.
menopause just dives a young woman straight into menopause, and it's very, very difficult. Or an older woman. Like anytime you just shut it down and you go straight into menopause, that can be extremely difficult. Women should always work with a provider on that because the
Hmm.
symptoms are intense
And these are
often.
usually like hysterectomies or things like this that do it, that type of.
Hysterectomies with the ovaries removed, at least one
Hmm.
of the ovaries removed.
Hmm.
Cancer chemotherapy can sort of drive. I've had women on the show who've gone through it multiple times,
Yeah.
kind of,
Yeah.
they'll
Just the
have
stories are
chemotherapy.
what lives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they'll kind of go into a sort of menopausal state and then come out and then they have a hysterectomy with an oophorectomy and then they go straight. It can be really harsh. So,
Hmm.
Oof. And I mean, I think I also want to click on like why we're talking about this at like from the athlete side of things.
Mhm.
So maybe talk about like, I guess what women, what do we know about, I guess, like perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause in terms of like what women can kind of expect or like issues we're running into with our athletic careers. Because,
Mhm.
we're
So you mean someone who's fit as a younger woman and then they start going through it?
or even just someone who's trying to train, well in it or just getting into it. Like, why are we talking about this on the consummate athlete?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's why I started my show.
Exactly.
You know, because I didn't know, and we can talk all about this, in any way you would like to. But as I mentioned earlier, you can still be having your periods. You can still be, I'll just give myself as a very clear example. I didn't start racing at a quote unquote professional because I was never a big P pro, but I raced at a professional level well into my 40s. And I didn't really get that pro card till I was 39. So I I was doing quite well racing around the world, all those things. And then at some point around 48, it did feel like somebody put a light switch off. Like my power, all of a sudden I put the same pressure and the same intensity into my pedals during a race. I remembered I was in Cuba and I was like, huh, that didn't work as it usually did. And I looked in the mirror and I thought, where I have always been an incredibly muscular woman. I'm like, where did those muscles go? And I didn't really I thought, okay, I'm just quote unquote aging out. And it's difficult because menopause does intersect with an age, around 50 somewhere we do lose power, we do lose some muscle.
Right.
But it seemed
Right.
pretty sudden, and you hear this again and again. I've been doing this show for 5 years and I hear the same thing again and again. Like, yeah, I expected that, but this was pretty quick. And that body composition changes can happen pretty quickly. And what I wish I had understood is that estrogen and progesterone also work in the brain. They work in your central nervous system. They work in all those things. So mood changes, I've heard many women say, I used to just get out of bed at 5 every morning and just be all in, and they have a hard time getting themselves up. They feel fatigue. They feel depressed. I felt incredible anxiety that I have never felt before. And it's different than the usual anxiety that I would walk around with. I would
Mm.
wake up in the middle of the night soaking wet with near panic, feeling like the world was sort of crashing down around me and having to talk myself off a ledge at 3 in the morning. Like that kind of stuff I was just like, what is happening? And
And
I
this is
thought,
Celine, sorry, is this like
I
in
was
the
like
course
46 at that time.
and like at 45 you didn't have this and then 6 months
No.
later all of this stuff happened?
Yes.
Like
Oh,
your
yeah.
power dropped, performance dropped, night
I would
sweats,
say the
anxiety.
anxiety stuff happened, all those mood things were around 46. And I didn't really notice the power and the stuff, but that happened like from 40, 47 or 48, like in a very short period in that time. I was like, now the performance is falling and I don't understand. And if you look, and I could call up a graph for you. If you look at the graph of women's hormones, unlike male testosterone, which takes sort of a nice even off ramp like a slide, women's hormones get very chaotic during the perimenopause transition and then sometimes just like fall off a cliff as they get close. So when those hormones dive, and they dive, they take a lot of that stuff with them. They estrogen helps with being anabolic, so with your muscle contractile strength, with your muscle mass, all of that stuff. So when it just disappears pretty quickly, you can have those effects pretty quickly. I hear from woman after woman after woman, and it breaks my heart, and they're devastated by it, and they're athletes, lifelong athletes who are like, I have gained all this weight, I'm not doing anything. I hear it.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
all over the hit plane. I have 30, almost 36,000 women in that group now. It's the number one thing I hear. And so many times over, I don't know how many meetings I've sat in, people will say, well, that's probably not just menopause. They must be eating more or moving less. And I'm like, these women have 20 years of Training Peaks logs. They are not
Right.
just
Right.
doing something. You know what I'm saying? And now we do know that, yeah, pe women are exquisitely sensitive to their hormones, and some women more than others. And everybody has this different experience with it, but it can be a very profound, quick shift for a lot of women. And if I want to leave women with nothing else, is I believe you, and there are many, 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 many women who are going through this with you.
Hmm. Yeah, and it strikes me that like the other big, well, there's sort of a couple of big things, but the access to getting help, it seems hard, right? Like it's okay, this is happening, you're waking up and all this, this seems more profound and something you should get help with, but then that next step of finding help seems very, very difficult. Um,
It's
you can
gotten
speak to the
easier.
US for, is it? Okay.
It's
Yeah.
gotten
So,
easier because there are more of us opening our mouths, and menopause is big business now.
right.
So you can go to menopause.org and find a menopause trained practitioner. I like finding any practitioner. That doesn't mean you're going to click with them right away. It doesn't mean they'll necessarily understand what you do as an athlete. So it can take some trial and error to find someone. But if you're looking for a menopause informed person, that's a great place to start. And I think that's the biggest thing to find in your life as you enter this stage is find someone who understands the transition, who is up to date, who has taken the time. Because until very recently, and like I mean very to 2023 recently, even residency programs for OB/GYN have not had menopause classes in them. So there's a whole generation of doctors, even as recent as 5 years ago or 3 years ago, who just don't have the information. So unless they get informed by special training, they may not really understand all of this. They may be great at delivering babies or doing pap smears, but this is a whole different slice of a woman's life that has not been well taught in medical schools until recently.
Hmm.
And also, telehealth has been a giant boom. You've got Genev, you've got MIDI, you've got Alloy, you've got all these online services that take insurance often. In the US anyway, I know it's different in Canada. There's one in Canada. Naya Health is in Canada, um, that you can turn to, and you are guaranteed to at least find a woman who knows what you're talking about.
Hmm. It strikes me a lot of these things too, sort of like finding a good physio or something. It's if you can talk to people too, and that's where I try and connect the dots for people. Where if this person I work with has had a really good experience with this doctor or this professional, that then we can connect the dots. So I do appreciate those couple extra links there that should help as well. But I think sometimes asking your friends or people in the local area, especially in
Yeah.
Canada where it might be a bit more restricted by like what you can get access to. You might be able to get in with a friend's doctor or something if they seem very supportive and knowledgeable.
And even like, that's one of the reasons I think the Hit Play Not Pause Facebook group, it's a private group and it's got so many tens of thousands of women because somebody can be like, I'm in Toronto. Does anyone have any idea?
Right.
And they can help
Yeah.
each other.
Yeah. Okay. The other, the thing that's probably one of the biggest hot button issues, I guess, is around HRT. And it strikes me that that has evolved a lot in the last 5 years, if not,
Yep.
I guess, even more recently. So do you want to just maybe just walk it through? Because I know there was a lot, the big elephant in the room is that there was concern around sort of like cancer risk, maybe some heart stuff, but that's evolved and there's a lot of different options there. So maybe just a high level, like, should we like we're starting to have the situation you were describing, tons of symptoms, really disruptive, huge changes in performance, if not energy, mental health. Like these would be things that probably we should go see someone, and HRT could be on the table. So do you want to just take us through like why that should be considered or when?
Absolutely. So this is a ongoing conversation, obviously. Very high level, too long didn't read kind of kind of
We'll
story
link
with
to a
this.
few of your podcasts as
Yeah.
well for
Yeah,
depth.
there you go. Because this is um way back in the early 2000s, 2002, there had been a study that got stopped. They were looking at could hormone replacement therapy reduce the cardiovascular risk in postmenopausal women. And that is very important to understand. They wanted to know if hormone therapy could reduce cardiovascular risk in postmenopausal women. So they recruited postmenopausal women. That most of the average age was 63, I believe. And they put them on hormone therapy at the time that was conjugated equine estrogen. That's an oral estrogen, comes from horse urine. That's the name is Premarin. Yeah, mare's urine. That's in the name. Um, it I won't. That's a rabbit hole we don't need to go down to. Anyway, it was that and a synthetic progestin, right? So that was the hormone therapy of the time, and that study got stopped early and made headlines around the world because it was causing more problems. That was getting linked to increased heart risk, breast cancer was part of the problem. Like they just pulled the plug. The problem is it wasn't, so we learned a lot. Like that study gets bashed a lot, but we did learn a lot. We learned that there seems to be a window of opportunity when hormone therapy is extremely useful, and that's like 10 years within that menopause window, not once you're 10 or 15 years down the line, although our thoughts there are evolving too. And mostly because estrogen can there's a clotting mechanism involved with it. So if you already have existing heart disease, it can make matters worse for you. But I've read articles that are like, but if your arteries are clear and healthy, and if you don't have existing heart disease, you really want to look at your cardiovascular age more than your chronological age, perhaps, when making these decisions. So it could be different for our population. We're learning so much. But long story short, if you go to any of the guidelines around the world, they all say the same thing. Benefit outweighs risk for most women, especially within 10 years around menopause, right? Like that is sort of the global recommendation. If you have specific contraindications, if you have active breast cancer that is, estrogen receptive, like those are really special circumstances that you have to work with your doctor in, because I have had Dr. Corinne Men is a leader in this field, women, Mindy Goldman is another, who are looking at, okay, is breast cancer even off the table? Because a lot of those they do this really great thing with the presentations on this, where they show like how much the real risk increased for women in breast cancer, and they'll have a room with little people on the screen, and there's 1,000, and then you add like one. You know what I mean? So it's like your actual risk is very, very small, as opposed to the relative risk.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that's a long way of saying that everything got very overblown, and they were looking at a very different population. And in the 20 years since, there's been endless revisiting to that population. This was a moonshot. It was a big population of women, and many, 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 many other studies. And they've learned also, and this is important, Peter, that women with a lot of symptoms and like a long duration or severity of symptoms, that is linked to cardiovascular disease risk and dementia risk. Like that's important to know. And it's
Hmm.
important to know that 20% of your bone loss can happen around menopause. Like that's a very precarious time for bone loss when menopause hits. That happens no matter what. And if you're at risk for osteoporosis, it's really important to know that. Like all these things. So we need to look at women holistically and look at what they're experiencing, what is their health, what is the risk. But if you are suffering and you have symptoms, 100% you should look into hormone therapy. And it doesn't have to be an all or nothing decision. You can try it. If you have side effects, because it's not without side effects. Some women get headaches, some women get nauseous. Sometimes you have to play around with the formulations and the dosages until you find your sweet spot. But it's a tool in a toolbox, and it shouldn't be this big scary thing. It's just another tool in your toolbox, and there are many that women can use to get through this time and feel more like themselves and perform and be healthy and increase their health span as well as their longevity.
Hmm. It makes sense to me. I think that, if it could help in, we could say the short term, but these 2, 3, 10 years, where the symptoms are very heavy during this perimenopause, you're saying that long term, if you could like mitigate some of those symptoms, improve some of those symptoms, improve the quality of life, that then long term you might see a better outcome. Whereas if you struggle through it and suffer through it, that you might actually end up with a worse outcome. Is that sort of what you're saying?
I'm saying that plus. So there's that, but there's also, and there are a lot of things that researchers are still trying to understand. But it does seem to be this connection between the symptomology, and these are vasomotor symptoms. They're driven by the brain. Estrogen is also, it helps with endothelial function. It helps, the vessels stay healthy. So there's more to it than that. And we don't fully know yet. It seems if you keep estrogen in the system through the transition, you may be able to improve a woman's cardiovascular health, maybe irrespective of symptoms, but if she's having symptoms, you certainly do, because her sleep is probably being disrupted and that's causing problems. So it's almost impossible to tease out one thing
Right.
in this
Right.
conversation because there's so many moving parts. But it is important to understand that if you are having a lot of symptoms, like I think you do want to address those.
And then I want to highlight what you said about the first one might not be the best dosage or
Hmm.
type or application or delivery method. I've heard multiple stories on your podcast now where it hasn't gone the first time, or this type didn't work, or I was on this type for a little while, but then a different type. So it's not just a like one and done in most cases, from what I understand.
Yeah, and that's again because everybody responds differently to these hormones. Think about how women respond to their own hormonal fluctuations. Like some women get terrible PMS, some women don't. Sometimes you get it really bad 1 month, and sometimes you don't. Some women have three babies, and the first one, they are vomiting constantly with their first, during the first trimester, and nobody completely understands why. It's just like the hormones impact everything, and how we respond depends on so many things. The receptors, our state of being, our social, cultural
Mm.
environment. It's hard to even tease all that stuff out. But yeah, so if you start hormone therapy, especially, they used to not even start it when a woman was perimenopausal. It used to be like, oh, we have to wait until you're postmenopausal for that because of this. Because when you're perimenopausal, you're still making your own native hormones. So for some women, layering estrogen on top of estrogen, so if their ovaries are going, we need more estrogen, and then you're like, I'm taking estrogen, they feel worse. They have
Hmm.
bleeding, they have problems.
Right.
So it can be tricky to dose women correctly during that perimenopausal period. Not saying it's impossible, and there's plenty of women who do it, but it is not just a here's one dose, set it and forget it. It is something that you need to work with a provider on. Like myself, I tried a ring, um, an estrogen ring at first, and the I was just too sensitive to it. It gave me headaches, it made me dizzy. I didn't like it. I'm like, this isn't worth it. And then my provider said, why don't we just try a really low dose gel? So I have like a really low dose gel I just put on my leg in the morning, and that's fine. My nights, because I only did it because I was having more night sweats, and this was post menopause. And I thought, I talk about this all the time. This is disturbing my sleep. Why don't I try it? And very quickly, those night sweats went away, and I was like, okay, great.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
that could still change. I mean, because your estrogen doesn't work with receptors that get it into the tissues, and those change over time too. Like all that stuff changes, and maybe at some point I won't need it, or maybe I'll be on it long term.
Right.
I don't think about it that way. I just take care of myself in the time.
Yeah.
It's so wild to me that so like for us women, we are really on kind of all of these, like all of that you just said sounds exactly like trying to figure out what birth control works for you.
100%.
So it's just like, oh, good. So from the time we're, I don't know, like teens even, like, well, and how many girls, especially from like our generations, got put on birth control at like 13 because of acne or something like
Yeah.
that. So like there are so many women who have been on some kind of hormonal thing for their entire lives. And I did actually want to double click. I mentioned birth control because I also wanted to kind of click on that. We've now mentioned IUDs a few times. Um, Talk to me about the like shift from like what does this all look like if you are still using birth control and you're in that perimenopause and you don't want to take out the IUD
Yep.
because
Yeah,
like
well, no, that's a great question. And I was going to segue into that. It is an excellent question because sometimes doctors will recommend if a woman is sort of struggling with all of this, using a birth control option. So that just suppresses the ovarian function and introduces a steady amount of hormones, right? It's kind of an easier way to sort of take care of that and also give her the birth control prevention that she's looking for. Very popular, Molly, is a progestin IUD and some estrogen with that because now you've got the real reason. I mean, some women benefit from having progesterone for sleep and mood and all of those things, but if she doesn't have a uterus, she doesn't necessarily need it. Like it can do its own thing, but a lot of women will just use estrogen by themselves if they don't have a uterus because you need it to protect the lining of the uterus, or otherwise it can become a cancerous situation. It can become too thick and you have problems. But yeah, like if you get a progestin IUD and some estrogen, I mean, there's all kinds of ways up this mountain.
Hmm. Now, have you ever run into, I'm just like gonna harp on the birth control for a second because like this is something my family is like very like late in life pregnancies tends to be the thing. So
Mm.
like this is something that is very top of mind for me is like, have you run into anyone who's, thought they were in perimenopause, but then, oh no, now like has another kid, like, get like assumes they're kind of past that stage and, you know, is doing all this stuff and then boom, like, guess what? Turns out you weren't quite there yet.
I have not personally, but I had a woman on the show, Mary Jane Minkin, who said when the week I interviewed her, she said within the past month I've had three women who are 46
Yeah.
who who were in that situation. So it's just like, don't think you're past that point ever until you are.
Yeah, just wanted to like double click on that for any perimenopausal women who are listening who are like, I'm gonna take out my IUD and start doing just estrogen and not worry about this anymore. Just PSA could happen.
Do you think probably in line with that idea of getting pregnant at older ages, I guess. I don't know if that's a new thing, but
Mm,
it strikes
more
me
common.
last time we saw you in person, I think was at Leadville. And it strikes me that these endurance events, Leadville, things like this, I've been tracking it because we have several athletes, like more and more athletes are in their 50s, 60s, even 70s this year. Like we have two people doing Leadville at 70 plus.
Wow.
Right? Like last year, I think there was 10 men who did it 60 plus or 65 plus, I don't recall. And then I think there was a few women even. Like I think the women tripled from like one to three or something who were doing Leadville. So it also strikes me that we're in this time, and I would say that you're in, doing amazing things too. And there's just these like people who are doing things that we don't really like as a coach, I'm sort of like, I don't know that there's a playbook for this. Like Joe Friel's Fast After 50 was at 50. He didn't cover 60s and 70s. Like, where's my textbook for this? So, do you think that some of these things that, even you're talking about on the show and people are sensitive to, like, is some of it because we're trying to be high performing at ages that previous generations just weren't?
I'm not sure I understand
Hmm.
what the question is as far as are you asking
I
if
guess
they're
like big,
experiencing?
yeah, yeah, I guess. Well, I don't know. I don't think that any of these things are new, but I wonder if an active person would be more sensitive or would notice you were a very fit and active person. Would you notice more of a decline in performance because you're so sensitive and your bar is so high? Do you get what I mean?
Well, I would definitely. I mean, if you the anxiety and all those things are, I think, the same no matter what your activity level. I mean, exercise should help, but it certainly is not an armor against it.
Right.
But yes, I do think that and I think this across the board, that we used to just assume that people got slower, lost muscle, all this stuff with age, and now we're sort of seeing that you can hang on a longer time. So before, a woman might not have noticed that she was losing power or muscle because she wasn't using them.
Right. She might have just
You know what I
stopped.
mean? Like
Yeah.
she wasn't
Yeah.
doing those things. Like unless you are trying to put out a certain wattage up a hill, like you wouldn't necessarily recognize that, oh, I'm significantly down in that wattage. Or women just weren't encouraged to do these things. Before Title IX, you didn't even have women playing sports, really.
Hmm.
So we have a whole generation of women out there now, and it's only going to get bigger. I say this all the time. We don't know where the ceilings are because we've really just gotten started,
No.
you know?
No. That's it. And like so now it's what I see in training. We can even segue into a bit of training stuff, but 60-year-old women who are doing 4-hour rides and saying, oh, I was feeling really sore and talk about fueling, but then also there's this weight gain thing. And it's like, well, that seems pretty amazing that you're out there doing a 4-hour ride, but it's like they want more. It's like, I think
Yeah,
they should strive for more, which is amazing.
but
But this
I
is like,
understand what
you
you're
get what I'm
saying.
saying though? Like, it's like,
Yeah,
we didn't notice this stuff before, I don't think, right?
and I also think that there needs to be, and I see this a lot in my group too. It's interesting when you look at the metabolic studies, 60 does seem to be a point where things start to change. Like there was a really interesting metabolism study that came out a couple of years ago now, where they found that it really holds the line until 60, and then something does seem to change, and
Mhm.
it also seems like if you look at the longevity and aging research, there seems to be inflection points in the lifespan, and 60 is one of those.
Hmm.
And also, if you look at people around the world, even indigenous populations, people who have been active their whole lives just because of life, everybody gets a little weight. And that is protective. I mean, the studies are pretty clear that having a little extra fat on you is not a detriment to you when you are an old person, when you are in your later years.
Sure.
And that's where not menopause is going to lead to that aging point, and at some point the aging stuff takes over, and we are not going to make this great trajectory upwards forever. At some point, you want to maintain or just not sort of take a lot of steps back or whatever, but we've got to give ourselves grace. And it's just hard because it's your identity, and it does mean sort of being like, I am getting older, but you don't want to think that way. So it's a messy thing in your
Hmm.
mind, but your bodies are going to change. Even the people that we look at who are like, wow, that person's amazing. You see those people who are 90 doing stuff, they're not doing the same stuff that they were doing when they were 60. They just 60. They just weren't. I mean,
Hmm.
yeah, it's amazing, but we all leave this mortal coil. Like we have this vehicle, and this vehicle is great, and we can keep the wheels on as long as we can, and we can buff it and keep it running as well as it can. But at some point, the, the vessel is done, and then we move
Right.
on.
It's a good point. There was a panel I watched with, I think it was you and Rebecca Rush and maybe Stacy. I can't recall if she was the third person or if there was a fourth person, and I apologize to them. But you and Rebecca
Oh,
Rush were there, so that's a good panel already. You were speaking towards, the different changes you all had gone through, and I could see that where it was like you're all pretty amazing still, and I could see that being like the message being sort of missed that like Rebecca Rush is and was the Queen of Pain, like she was Leadville champion and all these, and so it does change, right? Like you're different people, and I can see that being the
I don't think she
identity.
identifies as the Queen of Pain
Oh,
anymore.
oh, okay. Well, there you
But you know
go.
what I mean? Yeah, but
Her
that's what
identity
and I'm not
changed.
saying that in any way that is, I think herself, she would sit and think, I'm more than that. And that's not giving her less than. It's just saying like
Hmm.
that was an identity that she carried, and it served her until it maybe didn't serve her. And you have to look at that too in your athletic career, because some people deal with the loss of a step better than others, right? But if you're doing a lot of self-comparison, or you are very tightly wound with an identity that is always on a podium or always hits a certain mark, you're going to hit a place where you are frustrated and sad, and your sport will lose some of its joy. And that's where I tell people it's okay, one, to put it down and to be like, that chapter was awesome. What is my next chapter? It's also one of the things that I did when I was just like, oh, this is kind of a drag, because I couldn't stop thinking about how fast I was the year before at some stuff. And that wasn't fun for me. And it wasn't fun for me to show up and have people like, oh, you're gonna crush it. And I'm like, no, I'm not crushing anything at the moment. I'm not right now, I'm just not. So I was just like, but I still really love doing the things. So what does that mean? So I was just like, I need to find something that I don't expect that I'm going to get on any podium. I trail running. I love to trail run. I'm decent at it. I've never been the top of the top. I've never been on the pointy end of it, but it's a way for me to express, to train, to do the things I love, go through the process, see what I can do, see improvements because I'm in something that is a little different for me, and have that all that satisfaction without all the self-comparison that was bringing me down. Or because I really do really love hard things on my bike, let's do a 7-day bike packing trip. And from Durango to Moab, that's super hard. You've got to train, you've got to apply all the things, but it's not, there's no finish line that is the same way. The finish line is just, my God, I'm finally at the cabin. I'm finally at the hut. And it's still extremely satisfying in just a different way. And then sometimes people are like, okay, I'm ready to come back. I mean, after I did Ironman, I was like, no way, I'm done. And then in 2023, I was like, I'll do a half. I mean, you're not set. Your athletic
Hmm.
identity does not have to be etched in any sort of tablet that you hang on your wall and never
Right.
changes.
Yeah. I love that. And that was one of my questions for you, was just sort of like how you've dealt with that change and identity. And those are great answers. I know strength training is probably a bit of a part of it too,
Oh, for
as far
sure.
as
I was
seeing.
always one that I never loved it. I mean, I did
You're a
what I had to
cyclist, so you
do.
can't possibly like it.
Yeah, I did what I
Well,
had to do to be, but it was mostly really body weight stuff. I would do, pull-ups and planks and jumps and stuff and some weightlifting, but I never really had to. I did a lot. I was just naturally strong.
I was gonna
And
say you and I have that in common where
yeah.
like we like look at a dumbbell and suddenly your
Yeah.
biceps pop out. Yeah.
Until they don't,
Until they
which is
don't. Yeah, I know. You've
until they
scared me
don't, which is
about
where
that
I'm at.
now.
Yeah, but don't don't buy trouble. Just take don't. I'm always like, don't worry about stuff that is in your future. Who cares? Anyway, but that said, I probably would have. I never thought about lifting a dumbbell, and part of that was also the time we were in, right? Like barbell, I meant if I said dumbbell. I never thought about lifting a barbell because when I was coming up in endurance sports, like no endurance athletes were doing that. They were not lifted. That was just not part of the gym that we ventured into. And then it became clear, like, oh, you can lift weights like this and get really strong, but not necessarily put on a bunch of muscle just for show. And that really served me once I hit that 47, 48, 49 time. It's like, okay, I need to get some of this strength back. And Stacy's like, you need to lift heavier. I'm like, all right. So I went in, I learned how to lift barbells, and that was the biggest transformational thing I did, for sure, by far. Like learning to
Okay.
lift heavy and lifting heavy weight and integrating that. I found power again. I found that strength again, and now I actually enjoy it because I know how it makes me feel.
Okay, here's my question on that is do you think if you started doing it earlier, it actually wouldn't have then had the same like impact?
So hard to say. It's so hard to say. Because I can't go back and do that. I mean, there's not this great population of women I know who have always been endurance athletes and lifting heavy because this is all a little bit new in the ecosystem. You know what I mean? So it's hard to tease that out. Would it have put off the point that I felt power dropping? Probably. I mean, it makes sense that it would have.
Yeah.
It's that's a really it's hard to answer that, but I won't
Yeah.
stop. Like I can't like I used to be able to be like, summer I'm not touching anything, and
Right.
now I can't. Like 3 months is too long to be like, I got to do something.
Hmm.
So while you don't want to be prescriptive per se to those in their 30s who haven't gotten to any of these transitions yet, like would you say that that is something to that even just for yourself, if you could go back, would you say that like starting strength training more
Yeah,
actively earlier would be
for
wise?
for many reasons. I mean, I think
Yeah.
just in general, it makes you more durable. I think we know that it helps with economy and durability and all these kind of things. So I do honestly believe I would have been a better runner because when I ran, I was more prone to sort of, and this is like late 20s, early 30s even. I was more prone to overuse kind of stuff, and I have been much more, even at 56, 1,000 times more durable since I
Right.
started lifting than
Well,
I
even just the
was.
fact that you're running now, because I think, as you say, previously you weren't able to, so that's pretty amazing to take on running. So I think you'd have to attribute that. Like, what else could it possibly be? I don't think it's
Well,
like
I
a
could, but
benefit
as
of
soon as I got
menopause
over
that you
10
can outrun.
miles, I would start getting niggles and all that kind
Yeah,
of stuff.
yeah.
That knock on everything in sight. But I did a 21-mile ultra run in Patagonia, Arizona on the Arizona Trail and trained up for that, and it's great.
Hmm.
I don't worry about it anymore.
Is there anything, let's say we're going through perimenopause or menopause. Is there any commonalities in research you've seen or experts you've talked to as far as like training modifications, including strength in the week is an obvious one we're talking about right now. Is there anything else, I know hit and sit are popular. Is there anything else to include or not include, do less of in a
I
week
th
when we're thinking about a training week?
I think there's all kinds of, as far as like research, it's hard because so little research is done on women, and then a sliver of a sliver of a sliver is done on 40 plus women. So you have to take what you can get, and a lot of it is basic science or just the populations you can look at. I look a lot at the population of women that I have been working with for, 5 years in this community and just draw on that. There does seem to be, and this is not just women, but you'll see this, like you mentioned Joe Friel's book a while ago. He talked about it in Fit After or Fast After 50 or whatever it was, that at some point all that volume doesn't necessarily serve you, and like substituting some of that volume for strength is a good thing. Polarizing a little bit more. I do see women who do better with a little more polarization. So, and I think that honestly, Peter, that is a product of them actually giving themselves true easy days that are like
Hmm.
actually true, zone
Yeah.
one, zone two days, as opposed to the constant group ride that is always zone 3 to 4, no matter what,
Which
you
is
know.
just even a consequence of being a woman probably riding with men a lot of the time
Well,
is where
there
it's
is
just, it's
that.
always
Yeah.
moderate. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So just really being intentional about that, about having that real high, because you do need like the type 2 fibers are the first to go, the strength that you do need to really pay attention to that top end and cherish it and work on it. And also give yourself that recovery and time so that polarization tends to work better. Of course, if you're training for something like an Ironman's, like something long, you're going to have to, as you periodize your training in general, get into that gray zone race pace more. Of course you are, but you
Hmm.
don't need to do that year round. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So I
Hmm.
think when I talk about it, it's like you really need to be more intentional about your training and start to pay attention to that. I think that that is 100% true across the board. And I think that one of the things that we give lip service to a lot that women don't do as much as they should, and research does show is beneficial, is plyometrics, high intensity resistance training, stuff that really gets you that power, and that puts that stress on your bones, because everybody's walking around with a weighted vest right now. I just wrote about it. For God's sakes. Like the research is really not good. People are wearing them 10 hours a day and the
Yeah.
bone that it's
Yeah.
just not there. But
Yeah.
if you do some
Ending up
jumping,
with
the
like
exercise
neck
is
pain
there.
and
Like
shoulder
the
strains.
research
Yeah.
is there. So it doesn't take a lot, but your bones do. I've become very, very attuned with bone health because I just see how devastating it is if it goes, and it goes more with women.
Hmm.
So I think including jumping movements with women is important. And I do think one of the things that pairs with that, and Christine D'Ercol is going to be on the show next week, and she just talked about that, is that if you have had pelvic floor problems that are unaddressed, and that can become more pronounced with perimenopause as muscles weaken and the hormones change, and all of a sudden you are peeing yourself when you were doing plyometrics, you're not going to do plyometrics. So that can be hard as a coach, right? To be like, why don't you jump? And she's like, I don't want to tell you that I've wet myself every time I
Yes.
do it. But it is okay, I think, to get on top of that and be proactive with it in your language and say, these are the benefits of doing this kind of work. And I do know that also women who have had babies and who are in different times of life sometimes have issues, with pelvic floor control. And if that is an issue for you, maybe have a list of people they can talk to, whether like a pelvic floor therapist or that kind of thing, because
Hmm.
that can be life changing for women. And there are simple devices called pessaries and all kinds of things that they can do to mitigate that while they're addressing whatever the issues are that in their pelvic floor. Like that, pelvic floor health is something that is still just like, oh, we don't talk about
No.
that, even in areas like menopause where we talk about literally everything, that I think needs to really be on the in the conversation.
Hmm. Yeah, one of our friends here in town, Laura, is a pelvic health physio, so it's been on our radar. I think maybe earlier than it would have been, thanks to her. We do jumping, and I like jumping because it's more accessible to me than saying, okay, you need to lift heavy shit,
Yeah.
and but like, where's your weights? And so there's always this like, but we don't have room for it. We're not going to buy it. It's a long-term
We're
thing to
getting
build up
you
to
a
it.
squat rack. We're
Uh,
getting you it's happening. It's
uh,
happening.
yeah.
I mean, deadlifts are a beautiful thing, man. It's my
They
very
are,
favorite
they are.
move.
But I like jump,
Yeah.
and then we use it as a screen for that, and try and be very open with like, why are you not jumping? And it can be for a variety of reasons. That can be
Oh,
the
for
one.
sure.
But it can also be like, oh, I think I have knee pain and I can't jump. And it's like, well, how are you going to run a marathon if you can't jump?
Well, this is it, right? And then you can like address like, let's talk about that.
Right,
Like, let's
right,
get that.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to me, it just is like this great athletic thing as well. So I really like jumping, but that's a great thought around this population as well. Before we get too late here, the last one, I guess, that we haven't got through is sort of this idea of, carbs are the,
I was
the,
gonna
the
say just end on like the casual, like low key,
Super
really
easy.
simple
Nothing to say
conversation.
here.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I would say having come through the era of like eating is cheating, and I include
Oh my
myself in
God,
this,
me
where
too.
we were all
Mhm.
fasting and not eating, and it was this
I could go three
prize.
hours with nothing but a bottle. I'm
And I
not
say
taking
even
gel.
even
It's
just
only a 3 hour ride.
that's right. Same powered gel has gone with you to the moon and back. Eh,
Yeah.
We did have that power bar that came with us everywhere
It's our
for
relationship power bar. Yeah, it's
10
been with
years.
us as long as we've been married. And it's still good. So all that to say, this population currently that might be going through perimenopause, menopause has come through an age where we didn't eat, and we're losing the 5 pounds, and we read all the magazines that were saying you got to lose your summer weight and all this stuff. But now we're saying you need to, they're doing 200 grams
Oh
of
my
carbs an
God.
hour.
It's
You need
so
to have
insane.
carbs. So because this is one thing that comes up a lot with these athletes that I work with, and where it's like you want to do Unbound, but you're
Hmm.
eating not 10 grams an hour maybe, and it's coming from date balls with like dates and like a smidgen of honey in it or something. So where do you like, is there a good recommend, like, is it the same? Are they still people, or what do we do with carbs?
Are these still people?
Yeah, are these
So,
menopausal women still people?
yes,
Do we
they
still
are.
have
Somehow
carbs?
they're still people. We are. No, but like there's so much going on there. There's so much going on there because as you know, if you have not trained that, you it's going to be difficult for you to start taking in high levels of carbs. I mean,
Mhm.
in a mechanistic level, like because you need to train your gut. And that was sort of the bane of my existence because my gut would sometimes be like, nope, I'm done. And then your day is very, very, very difficult.
Mhm. Mhm.
But so a couple of things can happen. Let's take the mental piece first and say carbs are your friend and you do need them. You don't maybe need to go to what the tour guys and the Tadej
Right.
Pogacars
You
are
are not a
doing right now.
20-year-old Tour de France.
Whatever.
None of us
Yeah,
are.
and we don't even know if this is a good idea long-term health.
I
But
also think
like
half them are lying, so there's also that.
well, there's that. And or they're vomiting across the finish line as soon as they cross. They're like, oh, but anyway, anyway, but let's try to get at least 60, and if you can get to 90, that might be cool. Especially when you're talking about something like Unbound. I do think most people who DNF are not fueled. I really do. I think they don't realize how much energy gravel cycling uses on top of you burn so much more energy because it's then say a road ride of the same duration.
Mhm.
It's much more of a full body affair. There's more power, there's more energy, there's more psychological energy, all of it. So you also need to do that in training. You need to train your gut, all of those things. As a menopausal woman, the gut is changing. So estrogen impacts the gut microbiome in ways that, as with everything in the microbiome, we're still sort of trying to understand in the science, but there is something there. And also, women around menopause can become more carbohydrate sensitive, more insulin resistant. All of that stuff is true. That does not mean don't eat carbs. It means being more intentional. You need fiber, 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 fiber. Everybody talks about protein, and protein is really important, but I think fiber gets left out of the conversation. Most experts I talk to say women in this age demographic in this time of life should be aiming for 30 grams of fiber a day, and you should count one day, maybe two, and see how many you're getting. Because I
Mhm.
bet unless you're eating a plant-based diet, you are probably not getting that much.
Right.
Like if
Right.
you unless you're eating enough of a plant-based diet, you are probably not getting that. It's so important for the gut microbiome, for your energy, so you don't
And
go into
this,
low
just to
energy
clarify,
availability.
this is not in training. Like, this isn't with your
No, no, no.
200 grams of carb
I'm
an hour.
getting,
This
well,
is, yeah.
I'm getting, don't do that because you talked about the date balls. So then use your refined carbs, which you might be more sensitive to or whatever, during your activity,
Mhm.
like when you need them, when your
Mhm.
muscles are working hard and you don't have to worry so much about insulin, right?
Right.
Because your muscles are sucking it up anyway because they need it. So it doesn't have to be rocket science here. It doesn't, and you might have to, like anything, experiment with the stuff that works for you. Maybe Morton works for you or it doesn't. Maybe that blend you find palate fatigue or upset your stomach. But there are so many formulations out there between chews and gels and drink mixes. You'll find something,
Mhm.
that will be
Mhm.
able to get your system to tolerate and that will work for you. But If you go into low carb availability, you are on the path to low energy availability, and that puts you on the path to bone loss, muscle loss, and all kinds of stuff. And when you are perimenopausal or menopausal, you may not even know you're there because you don't have a period telling you that you have messed up your system so much now that you
Right.
don't have
And
a
you already
menstrual
have
cycle.
symptoms that you're dealing with.
Well,
Pretty
they
similar.
mirror each
You're
other,
not
yeah, and they can
sleeping. You're not.
exacerbate.
Yeah.
I have heard that a lot too, that
Yeah.
women are like they thought that they were in perimenopause and they really just weren't eating enough. Like
Right.
that
Right.
happens.
Yeah.
You'll feel so much better if you go unfueled. But you have to train it and you have to do it in your regular I mean, this is just coaching stuff. You
It
see it all the
is.
time,
It
I'm
is. And
sure.
I see it so often. It's a psychology thing as well. We have to work with like a sports psych often to get over the like, I deserve to fuel, like I can do
Oh,
it.
all of it. All
And
of
I've
it.
seen it go, thresholds at in the low hundreds go up to like that, 180, 200 watts, which is game changing to being able to like ride and do
Easily.
races and feel like you're in it.
Easily.
But it's
Easily.
that like,
And the weight sometimes goes down. The thing
yes,
that they're worried about
right.
goes
Which
in the
makes sense
direction
to
they want
me.
it to go in because the
Yeah.
body's not like, I am not giving up an ounce. Like, I am
Right.
not giving up
Survival
anything.
mode. And just more
Yeah.
work, right? I try and say like it's now you're doing more work and there's going to be more
Oh, totally.
stimulus and then the body's going to say I need to adapt
Totally.
to the stimulus whereas when it's shrinking and shrinking and starving. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's messy though. Very messy.
Very messy. And a lot of it is psychological. And I'm glad that you address it on that level.
I try to. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, we could talk all day. We'll link to lots of things, but I do want to respect your time here. So thank you for coming and talking to us a bit about menopause today, Selene.
Yeah,
Talk about it all day, every day.
I was gonna say also like shout out now where everyone can find you, find your podcast, all of the things.
Yeah, they can go to Hit Play Not Pause. That is a podcast. Feisty Menopause, which you mentioned earlier, is sort of the website that houses all the things. And they can also find the Feisty 40 Plus newsletter, which is not just, quote unquote, just menopause, but also all things I intersected also with anything a master's female athlete would need to know. So, yeah, and I've got a couple courses, Navigate Menopause and the Perimenopause Starter Pack for people who are just like, maybe I'm in perimenopause. I'm not sure. So it gives you the
The
lowdown on
starter
those
pack.
things.
I love it. I love
Just
it.
a starter pack. What do you need to know?
I'm terrified about it, but I love it.
Don't be terrified. It's all good.
Yes, but I don't need to be terrified because I also have you,
That's right.
text.
Yeah.
So I can be like, Celine, help.
The text may come from me, I guess, but yeah.
You get that more than you know.
I'm sure. Celine, thank you so much. This was, as always, so much fun.
Thanks, Molly.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Consummate Athlete podcast. If you want to hear more training, racing, and endurance sport advice, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at consummateathlete.com for a weekly dose of inspiration and advice straight to your inbox.